What is up, everybody? Welcome into Wednesday Live. It is July 12th. It is a sunny Wednesday afternoon. Today, what we're going to be talking about are a couple of minerals. One mineral in particular that is vital to health and life as we know it. It tends to get a bad rep, but we're going to talk about salt today. So let's pull up the screen here. There we go. Perfect. Ready to roll. All righty. So usually when we talk about salt, what everybody thinks about is high blood pressure, right? Salt is bad. Stay away from salt. Don't eat salt. Don't put salt on your food. Stay away from it. It's bad. It'll give you high blood pressure. Okay. Right. That's what we typically hear. However, that is very much not necessarily the case. And salt has kind of gotten vilified over the years, and has really taken the fall for a lot of those heart and vascular related diseases, even though it's not really the true culprit behind, the emergence of a lot of those diseases. We humans have been using salt for literally thousands of years to preserve food, as a seasoning. Back before refrigeration was a thing, it was a big preservative, right? That's how they kept meat. That's how they kept lots of different kinds of food so that it didn't spoil. So why then, if salt is really the root of all of these things and salt is really the bad guy, why have heart disease, diabetes, vascular diseases, all those kinds of things, why have those skyrocketed in the last 100 years when they didn't exist thousands of years ago, when people were using and ingesting more salt than we do today? Right. So that's kind of where that disconnect happens, and why we can really see that that's not the true cause of a lot of these lifestyle diseases. The true culprit behind all of this kind of ends up being boiled down to sugar. Okay. And if you've watched any of these before, if you've been in our office, if you've talked with Dr. Jeff or myself, we really tend to harp on particularly like processed carbs and sugars, right? Because when it really boils down to it, that's what's truly behind a lot of these lifestyle diseases: heart disease, heart failure, vascular diseases, hypertension, high blood pressure, those kinds of things. And so I'm going to pull up a little diagram right here. So this diagram is a picture of one of your nephrons, which is in your kidney. Okay. So your kidney essentially works as your body's filtration system, right? For stuff that it's excreting through urine, everything, your blood runs through your kidneys filter stuff out, and get rid of the things that it doesn't need, that our body doesn't need, or that, are bad for it. So your body keeps a pretty tight control over how much salt and how much sodium and potassium are kind of the two big ones. Your body keeps a really tight control on those and how much of them we have in our system at a time. It's very, very good at doing this. And, in a healthy functioning person, your body doesn't really need any help with that. It knows what it needs. It has a lot of sensors, a lot of backup systems, all those kinds of things to make sure that we have the sodium and potassium in our systems at all times, because if we don't have that, then our hearts wouldn't work, our veins wouldn't do anything, and we'd die, right? So this right here, again, there's a couple of kind of big words on here, and some this IRS1 right here that it's talking about is a gene. Not important that we remember the name, but kind of important when we're talking about insulin resistance, which is what happens when we consume a lot of these processed sugars daily or even regularly. We end up with what they call insulin resistance. Okay, and insulin resistance means there's oftentimes too much or not enough insulin running around in our system. Your body kind of loses control of the ability to regulate insulin. So this IRS1 is responsible for producing and maintaining the correct amount of insulin in your body at any given time. When that expression goes down, so this says decrease IRS1 expression, so that means that this gene expression is decreasing. Okay, so we have less of it, and in your muscle and adipose tissue. So that means your body's doing a poorer job of regulating how much insulin is present in your system at any one time. Okay, so Then, because we have a decreased expression of this gene, we end up with hyperinsulinemia, which just means we have too much insulin running around in our system. Okay. And insulin is your body's response to sugar. Okay. Our body, we have blood sugar. We have a certain amount of sugar in our blood that's supposed to be there at rest and supposed to be there after we eat. And then when we're exercising and all those kinds of things, that sugar gets used as energy. So it kind of gets shuttled around where it needs to be. Hyperinsulinemia means that we have too much insulin in our system at any given time. Okay. So we end up with hyperinsulinemia. Your body doesn't really have, it doesn't really have a job when there's too much insulin. There isn't enough for it to do. So it ends up causing problems in all kinds of places, including the kidneys. Okay. So when we end up with hyperinsulinemia, now we have increased insulin action in the kidneys. Okay. Which just means that we have too much insulin in our kidneys. It doesn't need to be there. It shouldn't be there. And it's going to start wreaking havoc on our bodies. Okay. So then as a result of that too much insulin in your kidneys, now we end up with Na is sodium. Okay. Na, we end up with too much sodium resorption. Okay. So and that results in hypertension. Okay. Because water holds on to salt, or water grabs onto salt and clings to it. Okay. So if we have too much salt in our system, your body will hold on to more water than we need. And when you have more salt and water in your blood volume goes up, you have more blood. Now it's a lot more stress on your heart. Okay. It's like if you have a hose, or a pipe that where water flows through and the pipe's only half full. Well, that's not a whole lot of stress on the sides of the pipe. Right. But if you pump that pipe full of a roaring stream of water, then it's going to cause a little more stress on the pipes. Okay. That's how your blood vessels work. Okay. And your heart, because your heart does that pump. So now you have too much blood floating around and your blood pressure goes up. And so again, kind of as we backtrack here, all of this started because we have too much insulin in our system. Okay. The way that you get too much insulin in your system is by eating too much sugar regularly. Okay. And again, your body kind of loses track of how it's supposed to regulate that. So when it doesn't do a good job of regulating that, that's where we end up with too much insulin running around in your system. Okay. So now while salt ends up, when we've gotten to this point, then we're probably going to need to pay attention to how much sodium we're intaking, because the more it's in your system, the more that you can resorb, right? The more that your body's going to take back in after it should be getting rid of it. But the root cause is not this sodium resorption. Okay, because the sodium resorption wouldn't happen if there wasn't too much insulin running around in your kidneys. Okay, so part of the reason why, again, salt kind of gets the bad rep in today's society is because where do we usually find salt? We find it with French fries or potatoes or other fast foods, or kind of like junkier foods, right? Chips are potatoes. Those are really high in carbs. Carb is just another fancy word for sugar. Carbohydrates are sugars. So when you eat carbs and salt together, that's where we end up with insulin is present in the kidneys. Okay. Because there's insulin present in the kidneys, we hold on to more of that salt. We end up with higher blood pressure. Okay. Now, in addition to the higher blood pressure, this is where we also end up with vascular diseases. Atherosclerosis is kind of the scientific word for that, where the hardening of those vessel walls. Now that's going to increase your blood pressure even more. It's going to cause plaque buildup. Then you're at risk for myocardial infarctions or heart attacks, stroke, all that kind of thing, embolisms, all that kind of stuff. So, again, all of that to say there's a little bit of nuance to that, because if we're in a state where we are consuming a lot of sugar or already have hypertension, then we probably will want to monitor at least for a time our salt intake. Okay. But more importantly than that, we should be monitoring our sugar intake. Okay. So the salt intake is not the problem, right? It's the salt retention that's the problem. It's when it should be getting filtered out in your kidneys, your body's holding on to it because there's insulin present. So again, it's not a salt intake problem, it's a salt retention problem. That salt retention only happens when insulin is present. So after we've eaten sugar, then we eat salt, or eat something with salt in it or on it, or like the potatoes, right? Because potatoes have a lot of carbohydrates, causes a big insulin response. Now your body's holding on to the salt and we're becoming more insulin resistant, which is also, which is essentially insulin resistance is type 2 diabetes. So it's kind of on a spectrum there, but when we fully reach insulin resistance, that's called type 2 diabetes. So the way that we get around this is we avoid that really heavy sugar intake, right? Salt is very, very important. Like I said, it was used as it was used in food. It was used as a preservative. It was used as a seasoning. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. It's also very, very necessary for hydration and proper heart function. Okay. Like I said, potassium and sodium are the two that your body really, really tightly regulates in order to keep that healthy heart function going. And if we don't have enough of it, that can also be an issue. Now, again, depending on where we're getting that salt and what we're eating it with, that's where a little bit of the nuance comes in. Because again, sugar tends to be the problem, carbohydrates tend to be the problem, that then salt now starts becoming a little bit of an issue because we get the high blood pressure, all those things. But for people who eat pretty relatively quote unquote clean, who eat pretty, whole food centered diets, and if they work outside, if they work out intensely, if you sweat a lot, any of those kinds of things, now we're losing that salt without ever regaining any of it, right? Because a lot of those foods don't naturally have salt in them. So this is where sometimes being more liberal with how you salt your food or cooking with salt. Again, for people who've been in the office in the last couple of weeks, and even honestly, this shirt that I'm wearing right here says salty on it. Using hydration packets, right? So we've started stocking LMNT in the office because, again, for people who work outside, who work in hot areas, who sweat a lot, who work out, athletes, any of those kinds of things, a lot of times we don't actually get enough salt, particularly if we are eating pretty cleanly. Okay. So again, salt, very important, very necessary. Sugar becomes the issue. When we're consuming that salt with sugars, with carbs, that's where we end up with that, again, get too much insulin running around the kidneys, that hyperinsulinemia, increased insulin in the kidneys, salt resorption. Okay. That's where we run into problems. So substituting out sugar becomes even more important, particularly again, whenever we're exercising or sweating or any of those kinds of things, because we have to be able to get that salt back, but we don't want to do it with the sugar. So, salt, red meat, butter kind of all got the bad rep in the 80s, 90s, because a couple of large suppliers of very sugary drinks hired some scientists to tell us all that fat and salt and butter were killing us, when in reality, it's the sugar that really gets to you. The salt is like the symptom. Okay. But the real cause, the root cause, is the sugar. And that's why that becomes such an issue. So that's one of the reasons why I really like our reset program. Again, if you've been in the office, you've probably heard somebody mention it. Our metabolic reset program kind of helps with that a little more clean, that cleaner eating. People use it for weight loss, to reset their hormones, all those kinds of things. Because once we get into that hyperinsulinemia phase, into that kind of insulin resistance, now now hormones are running amok. Your metabolism's in the tank, your GI, your digestion isn't great, all those things. So that's one reason why I love that. Shameless plug. But anyway, so if this is something you're curious about, or that you want to even just have a conversation about, head on over to our website, www.myadvantagelife.com. Dr. Jeff and I love to talk about this stuff with people. We'd love to have a consult with you, sit down, have this conversation, come up with strategies, those kinds of things that we think are going to be helpful for you in particular. Obviously, this isn't medical advice for anyone in particular. This is a general broad overview of the topic. So if you are curious how this would directly affect you, like I said, go to our website, www.myadvantagelife.com. Come on in, schedule an appointment, call the ladies up front. They'll get you scheduled. And we can sit down and have that conversation and really help you kind of dial in whatever your goals are, whether it's better hydration, it's better performance in sports or activities, or even just making some nutritional changes, making some lifestyle changes, those kinds of things that are really going to help you down the road with your health. So, like I said, I'll wrap this up with schedule, call the ladies, we'll sit down, we'll have this conversation. We'd really love to help you kind of tease out the nuances of this topic. It's something we really, really love helping people with. So come on down, come pay us a visit.